right, we've spent a lot of time in the last couple of months talking about polling. All right, talking about polling. And, of course, when an election came last week, we saw that, as predicted, the polls were off quite a bit. There's some soul-searching going on in the industry, and it goes beyond just the pollsters, because I see this relationship between the media and polling companies that, quite frankly, is just a little too close. And I think they've become interdependent financially. And that's, in my opinion, part of the reason we're seeing skewed polls. But I want to talk to an expert and get his opinion. And that is none other than Scott Rasmussen. He is a public and opinion pollster himself, an editor-at-large at Ballotpedia. Scott, welcome back to the program.
Always great to be with you.
Okay, is my suggestion there off track, that there may be too close of a relationship between the media that uses polls very heavily in an election season and pollsters who rely upon the media to fund their polls?
To fund and promote, and yes, it's not a healthy relationship. In a recent column, I said it's a little bit, the pollsters are a little bit like a bartender who serves a drunk customer one too many shots of whiskey and then is surprised when there's a car accident on the way home. One of the problems that pollsters have, and this is something that's been going on for a while, is when there's an election coming up and reporters want more and more polls, we keep feeding them. But there should be a little bit of reflection. And it's not because of this year or because of 2016. There have been problems with the broader election forecasting industry in every single election of this century.
Yeah. I read your article, and I actually liked your analogy about the bartender being the pollster serving another drink to the media who is intoxicated to begin with their own ideology, but that's another story. But yes, to carry that analogy a little further, voters ought to be like trial lawyers and hold them accountable for what they are doing. And I think your underlying argument in this soul-searching that you're calling the industry to do is a very significant question. It goes beyond just the polls and the media. It goes to how it is undermining our whole electoral system.
Absolutely. What happens when we have forecasters saying one thing is going to happen and then something else entirely happens, or the perception of something else entirely happening, all of a sudden there are questions raised about fraud. How could they have told us this was going to happen and something else did? And it just raises a whole series of questions. And adding to that is just the partisan nature of it. Many years ago I did some polling in 4 states that all had a team in the Final Four of the basketball tournament. And all 4 states were convinced their team was going to win because that's what partisan analysis does for you, and that's what we have a lot in the political forecasting industry.
Well, I'm just looking down a list of the polls, pre-election polls. USC, Dorn's Live, 54 for Biden, 42 for Trump. Long Island University, 47 Biden, 36 Trump. CNBC, 51 Biden, 40 Trump. AP, 51 Biden, 36 Trump. And I mean, that's pretty much consistent with what we see, but that's not what we saw at the polls.
No, and one of the things, just to be clear, there's a distinction between, there's all kinds of different types of polls. It turns out that polls that use the old school technology of live operators making calls were further off the mark than anybody else. And there's a reason for that. It's because we don't talk on the phone the way we used to.
But we've known that. We've known that.
That's right.
That's not a new development.
Right. And so you actually had a lot of other polls out there that did a much better job of projecting what was going to happen, but the analysts were still convinced that the old school way. So again, there's a combination of the polls and forecasters that is mixing this up.
But in the media, though, wanted those polls. I believe.
That's right.
They wanted those
Absolutely.
polls that showed what they wanted the outcome to be. And I think that's where a lot of Americans are, myself included.
Yeah.
Is that the polls are used more to shape the outcome than tell people tell the public where people are.
That's right. I would agree with that 100%. And in fact, one of the things, and one of the reasons I wrote the article that I did, is because when I watched on election night, what I saw was not outside the range of what I expected from the data. My final poll on the national level showed that Biden was up by 7 with a strong Republican turnout. He would win by 5. And it looks like when all the votes are counted, he's going to win the popular vote by about 5. When I looked at that data and all the other information out there, what I told people before the election was there's a range of potential outcomes. The best case for a Republican would be a narrow Trump victory after weeks of recounts.
Yeah.
The best case for a Democrat will be a modest Biden victory. So I was expecting that, and clearly the results began to come in on the upside for Republicans, but not shocking. But the analysts were totally taken off guard by this, the ones we saw on TV, and I think it's because of what they were hoping to see.
And we've had you on the program before and some other pollsters that have modified their methodology because the habits of Americans have changed, and also because of the cancel culture we live in, that some people are reluctant to actually tell the truth, and so you've got to go about it different ways. And those pollsters were more accurate in their projections. So that would tell me that, number one, that's not new, and as I just said a minute ago, they should have changed their methodology, but they didn't, and I think it's for a reason.
Well, I think there's a lot of reasons for it, and one of them is the one you cited. There's another reason within the industry. A lot of those pollsters want to establish themselves as the gold standard and pretend that anything that changes the way we've always done it must be wrong. So they were trying to establish a way to distinguish between good polls and bad polls, and it kind of backfired. There's no other way to say that. But this is something that's been going on. And look, I think the problem is bigger than polling methodologies. Let's start with a very simple fact. If you have a close race, I did some polling in Utah for the congressional race out there. My final poll showed the Republican Burgess Owens up by a single point. Well, while I'm happy with the way you present that poll and you try to present the range of potential outcomes, it is impossible to use a poll with a 3.5-point margin of error to predict who's going to win a race that's going to be decided by 1 or 2 points.
Right.
It's the wrong tool for the job. So one of the things I suggest in my column is we, as pollsters, need to take some responsibility and stop doing those last-minute polls. I am not going to do a poll on the night before the Georgia runoffs this year. I will do some polls early. I will try to set a focus on what the people of Georgia are looking at and seeing and who is motivated and lots of information. But I'm not going to do a poll on the last day to say, oh, here's who I think is going to win by how much.
Yeah, because I mean, having been an elected official and having been around this for almost 3 decades, those polls are utilized by the campaigns and the candidates and in the media to shape voter actions. And,
right.
And so if your candidate is winning, you're motivated. Now, if they're winning too far, it can backfire. If they're way out ahead, it can just say, well, I don't need to go vote. My vote won't matter. But especially through the process, it kind of people. I found that the psychology of people is the psychology of winning. People want to be on the prevailing side, and so that has a shaping influence. Not everybody's driven by a hardcore ideology and principle. Many times people just want to be on the prevailing side. I saw that among elected officials. I see it among the electorate as well.
That's right. And we also have to remember that not everybody lives and breathes politics. Only about 13% of voters talk politics every day or just about every day. Twice as many rarely or never discuss it. So when you're talking about a wide range of people like that, the information that comes out at the last minute can have an impact.
Scott, well, go ahead. Finish that thought because I want to move on to something else.
Well, no, and I was going to say I think one of the things that I see is harmful in all of this when you talk about the election polls this way is there are many good uses of polling that just sort of get lost in the shuffle because of this obsession. I think we should be doing a lot more polling to get to the underlying attitudes of what voters think, and doing so in their language, not in the language of official Washington or in the language of politicians. And we need to find ways to lift up that kind of information, because what that's doing is not telling you, so-and-so is going to beat this other candidate. It's beginning to say, I need to understand why somebody else thinks that way, and let's find some ways to build bridges to them.
Absolutely. And that's how we often use polling at the Family Research Council, is to try to figure out where people are, why they're there, and how we can help, move to a consensus on something. A lot of times it's just language, the language that
Right.
you use, that they understand, because words don't always retain their meaning, especially in the culture in which we live today. There's people changing the language.
That's right. Absolutely. I give an example in the article on one that's on an issue obviously very important to many of your listeners, on the topic of abortion. I see lots of polls coming out about, do you favor or oppose Roe v. Wade being overturned? Well, I would actually ask people what they thought would happen if Roe v. Wade was overturned. And it turns out a majority of voters don't know. They don't know what the legal issues are.
Right.
They don't understand the implications of what would happen if it is overturned. If that's the case, then what's the value of asking them if this law
Right.
should be overturned?
Because they don't know. They're just kind of
guessing. A better way to focus you want to focus on their attitudes. What do they think
Right.
about the issue? What are they trying to get to?
Yeah, absolutely. We just got a couple minutes left, Scott, and I want to step back for a moment from the polling in this election cycle to why it matters, because you and I were talking before, and you actually write about this in your article, that this has been a problem going back probably 30 years, where polls are off. But it matters more now because we're such a divided nation. Where an election comes down to just a handful of votes. So now people are paying very close attention if there's allegations of fraud or if there was manipulation. It matters now.
That's right, because we're having such close, divided elections. These differences seem to get magnified. The polls were actually further off in 2012 than they were in 2016. They predicted a very narrow victory for Barack Obama, and he won by a significantly bigger margin. Well, in that case, nobody got too upset because the end result was what we expected. When you have a situation where Donald Trump can be elected president in 2016 by 77,000 votes in 3 key states, all of a sudden, all of these assumptions matter. And what happens when voters watch and you're told one thing is going to happen and something else does, there's a natural inclination to think something's rotten here. Somebody's cheating, and it is challenging the legitimacy of our government. And all of us should be concerned about restoring that sense of legitimacy.
And, quite frankly, under fallen man, there's always going to be those that are going to do something that's not right according to the rules. But I think what has drawn more attention is that when you have the people in the power who should be abiding by the rules, bending the rules, changing the rules, or ignoring the rules, that inflames the situation even more.
Absolutely. In fact, and this is a sad commentary on where we are, but a lot of people on the left were really surprised that some of their accusations against Donald Trump being corrupt or cheating didn't help them more. And they did find polls to support their idea that a lot of people maybe thought Donald Trump used his position to help his family. What they missed when they were talking about that was, 7 out of 10 people think that about Donald Trump. They also think that about 7 out of 10 also think that about Joe Biden. There is a perception that if you are in the political world today, you are corrupt.
Yeah.
And you are going to do whatever it takes to win, and that's part of the problem.
Yeah. No, that's been there for a long time. I experienced that myself. Scott Rasmussen, as always, great to have you on the program. Always appreciate your insights. And I want to continue the conversation about reforming the polling industry and the whole relationship with the media. I think it's a critical component of restoring confidence in our system.
Well, I agree with you on that, and I'm going to be writing a lot about it.
All right. Well, we'll be talking a lot about it. Scott, thanks so much for being with us.
Thank you.